Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the Psych coach, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to tame your temper. It's totally normal to feel angry. Anger is a normal human emotion to have. But what happens when we end up spending hours ruminating about a situation after an event has happened and wasting our time? What happens if we feel so guilty about our angry outburst? We end up overcompensating. What happens if we end up getting so angry that we're embarrassed about our behaviour and really regret it? I'm talking about unhealthy anger today and what you can do to rein it in if you recognise you've got unhealthy anger. What I would say is it's also about recognising that some anger isn't obvious. Some anger can be very passive aggressive, where you're maybe sarcastic, where you mutter under your breath, where you're really in a bad mood and you make it obvious you're in a bad mood but you don't convey why. That too is unhealthy anger. So listen up if you want to learn how you can tame your temper a little bit. Tip number 1 is to identify your triggers. Typically with anger, there are 3 triggers. 1 is ego defensive, where we believe we are being threatened, our egos are being threatened. 2 is goal obstruction, where we want to get something and something's getting in our way. You know, you want to get from A to B, but someone's driving really slowly. You wanted to get to the top of the class for something, but someone got in your way and they got it first. Or the other trigger for anger is people behaving in a way we don't think is acceptable. All 3 of those triggers, ego defensive, goal obstruction, and transgressing our personal rules, are the 3 areas that your anger is highly likely to fall into. What I would say is start noticing the episodes where you've got particularly angry over the past few weeks and working out which category they fall into. If it's ego defensive, chances are it might be some self-esteem issues. If it's goal obstruction or people behaving in a way you don't think is fair, chances are you're probably very rigid and perhaps a little dogmatic with the expectations you've got of other people. Once you've recognised the triggers, you can notice it when it's acting out, and doing that, or when it's playing out, and doing that helps just put a little bit of distance between you and the situation, because you're able to think, aha, okay, my ego's threatened here. This is why I'm getting really worked up. Ego defensive anger typically sounds like, I'm not here to be made a fool out of. Do people know who I am? I'm not an idiot here. That's typically how ego defensive anger will come out. The other types of anger will typically sound like, people shouldn't do this. People must behave like this. I shouldn't have to deal with X, Y, or Z. Work out the anger triggers that are most relevant for you, and that will at least help in the initial days of you starting to identify, okay, I know what's going on here. My ego's being triggered here, or I know what's going on. I'm getting antagonistic and getting angry because people aren't behaving in a way I think they should be. Tip number 2 is take time out of a situation if you need to. I don't mean very angrily leaving a situation and slamming a door. I mean as calmly as possible, which of course is pretty tricky if you're feeling angry, but as calmly as possible, exiting a situation that is very triggering for you. Usually it is helped if you're able to say, I am feeling very worked up, I need to leave. Leaving will allow you a chance to try and rationalise your thoughts, to try and gain a bit of composure before re-entering the situation. Something to be really careful of if you've exited a situation is to not spend that time angrily ruminating about the injustice that has just taken place. If you exit a situation and you spend the next 5 minutes thinking, that was outrageous, I can't believe that's happened, who do they think they are behaving like that, and working yourself up into a bit of a frenzy, you're going to go back into the situation just as worked up as when you left it. Instead, try and use the time when you've removed yourself from that situation to think, I don't like this, but this is bearable. Actually, what's happened is bad, but it isn't absolutely horrific. I recognise that my ego's been threatened here, or I recognise I've been quite dogmatic in the expectations I've got of someone else. And you'll still feel angry, but the idea is you just take a little bit of the heat away from the situation before you re-enter it. Tip number 3 is to maintain perspective over the injustice. When we're feeling really angry, it's easy to think that what's happened is absolutely outrageous. Think about the time where you last experienced road rage. Maybe someone cut you up, maybe someone overtook you. They're irritating things, or they can be irritating things, but they're not terrible, are they? They're inevitable if you're a driver, for example. So spending ages focusing on how bad it was and you can't believe it happened, it's disproportionate, isn't it? So trying to maintain some perspective on the injustice of the situation will help to control your anger a little bit. In the early days, it's really difficult to maintain perspective when you're in the thick of it. So the best you can do is, as quickly after an angry event has happened, is for you to think, okay, how bad was the injustice there? What is it that was so terrible? Have I had a slightly disproportionate reaction to it? If you're able to recognise you have, good on you. That's a huge step in you starting to control your anger better. Tip number 4 is don't recruit allies. When we're experiencing unhealthy anger, we are often compelled to recruit allies. By that, I mean we are often compelled to retell the story of what's happened and the injustices that have taken place in order to get people to agree with us. And for other people and our friends and our family to say, I can't believe that, that's so bad, how could someone do that, that's terrible. And of course, it's cathartic, and in the short term, it's nice to be heard and for people to support us. But in the long run, all recruiting allies does is fuel your anger about the situation. So be very careful about the amount of allies you're recruiting. If, I don't know, after an event has happened, you need to call someone and tell someone about it, fine. But if you're doing it hours, days after the event, and you're noticing yourself getting really worked up as you retell the story and as people agree with how the audacity that someone had to speak to you the way they did, it's not good for you. It fuels your anger. It's like pouring petrol on the situation. So rein in the amount of times you recruit allies. It's a behaviour symptomatic of unhealthy anger. And tip number 5 is to assert your feelings honestly. If your style of anger is passive aggression or sarcasm, it can be just as bad as people who are outwardly aggressive and shouting. Ultimately, both create a really bad atmosphere and make us unpleasant to be around. So don't tell yourself that just because your style of anger is more hidden, it's not as bad. It is, and people pick up on it. So instead of being passive aggressive and muttering under your breath or moaning or recruiting allies or just sort of ruminating about the situation afterwards, try and assert your feelings in a healthy way. Often people will think they've been assertive when they've been angry, and actually they've just been downright aggressive. Assertion is about politely requesting something. I would prefer it if that hadn't happened. I was actually quite frustrated when that situation took place. I'm feeling really angry about how you've just spoken to me. All of those are healthy assertions that can be done when you're feeling very angry, but they are not aggressive. They're not name calling. They're not you raising your voice. They're not you swearing, and they are healthy. So practice healthy assertion as opposed to aggressive or angry outbursts when you're trying to tame your temper. These things aren't going to be easy, and they take practice, but the more you practice, the easier it will become. Put these strategies into place and review how you're doing in your quest to tame your temper, because if you do, it will start getting more manageable and it will be far better for the people around you. If you've enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will be sure to give you plenty more tips on how to use psychology on a day-to-day basis.